What's up, everybody? Today we got a special Zoom interview with my new friend, Joel Smith from Just Fly Sports. It's a mutual friend connected us, and then after perusing his Instagram, I thought we ought to talk to this guy. um, Joel, I love what you're doing. I love your stuff. I dabble in both things, like where you go with your content is right up my alley as far as fitness and how intricate it is. But I love that when I look at your social media as a whole, it is like, man, this guy's doing it right. Content, content, content. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, can you give everybody a little bit of a background on who you are, where you're from, how you got started? We'll go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Terry. So my background, I'll give just the short of it as it relates perhaps mostly to Just Fly Sports, is I was in high school all throughout youth, athlete, always loved athletics, loved human body, loved performance. Anything that I was, to be honest, probably that, like that nerd. I remember I was telling my camp counselor once when I was like 8 or 9, I was reading a book with all this demographic information on the different states in the U.S. And I was telling him like, hey, give me a state. I'll tell you the capital and the most 3 populous cities. I was just kind of like a weird facts type of person. And I put that just obsession for facts, I think, into an athletic career. And so I started out being a track coach. It started at Wisconsin Lacrosse. As a graduate assistant, led to a job at Wilmington College of Ohio, where I was a track coach, strength coach, did lecturing, so a lot of hats, which was good for me as a young coach and professional. And then it was where actually I started Just Fly Sports. And I never would have thought about myself as an entrepreneur. I came from a household that was like, just go to college, get a degree that pays, it's, make sure your degree pays enough, or whatever you're going to get pays enough. And that caused me a lot of anxiety because I never could find the career that really seemed to be awesome, that also paid well. It seemed like to do a career that I liked would be barely getting a paycheck as far as what it seemed was possible. And so when you're under these belief systems, and you think this is all the only place you have to go, there's a lot of anxiety. So in the back of my mind, I always told myself I was going to eventually have a website. And at Wilmington, I finally pulled the plug and made that happen by getting a partner to help me with all the graphic stuff in the back end. And that's Jake Clark. He does all the nice stuff that you see on my social media and website. That's him. And I knew I couldn't do that. I knew I had to have a partner to do that with me. But I had been writing for a little while beforehand, and I had a soft start in just when Blogger was popular. I don't know, I doubt it still is. I had a blog for 5 years that was followed by actually a fair amount of people in the athletic space. And so that became Just Fly Sports. That job got me to UC Berkeley as a strength coach there for 8 years. Worked with a lot of really good athletes, Olympians, and then even just kind of people who are almost average Joes in their athletic ability because of the expansive nature of the sports there. So just such a spectrum. Coached youth track on a club level. And I finally took the jump into full-time entrepreneurship about 2 months ago. I made the decision about 3-4 months ago, but actually took that leap July 1st, and I'm a full-time entrepreneur right now and here in the Cincinnati area.
So cool. And you're originally from the Bay Area, you said, right?
Spent 7 years in the Bay Area. That was going out to Cal.
Okay.
It would be cool if I would have grown up there. It's nice there, man.
Beautiful, yeah.
Not right now with all the fires, but I grew up in Milwaukee. So Milwaukee, and then, just down to Ohio, went to college in Ohio, and then coached in Ohio, and then here I am back again.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. So, to kind of, I would like to just for a second, I want to talk about fitness, and I know that might bore some of my entrepreneurial people here watching, but the content that I often, when I was running a gym, it was like, make the complex simple. And I feel like you do that really well because there's so many complicated, especially with track coaching, run coaching and things like that, like the gait, your hips, and all these proper form things. You make that complex stuff very simple. Do you have like a I guess, a recipe for doing that, or is it something that just comes really natural to you?
I think that if I have a gift, it's always been a strong intuition for how to pick up a skill. And I'll say this, like I was always an against the grain person as a track athlete. And I think that I will say this too. I think that just the act of sprinting and human locomotion, running, sprinting, that's where no matter where you are on the fitness spectrum, you work with Gen Pop, you work with athletes, you work with young, older, whatever, we can all come into that area. Like that is us. And so with me, like I always had this kind of like an internal BS meter a little bit on when someone would, when I was in track in high school, our coaches, I won't say they didn't know anything, but they didn't, like, I would always hear these other coaches giving all these instructions to their athletes. And I'm like, why do you know, how do you know that what you're saying is right? And I've always asked that question. And that led me on a journey really where the latest book I put out, Speed Strength, is all about flipping kind of our run model on its head. But I always felt like I was able to really decide if an instruction or a set of instructions and the way you coach something and the way you acquire something was good or not. And when I was coaching athletes in track, I felt like I was very good at where the other coaches would stand around and say, hey, if they're throwing the javelin, hey, you need to hold your arm higher. You need to do this with your foot.
Yeah.
Well, you're going so fast when you do that skill, you don't have time. It's like throwing a javelin or running even. It's kind of like you're driving a car with 30 steering wheels.
Right.
And when the coach tells you to do one thing, it's like your body has to do 30 other steering wheels, and you're trying to then think about another steering wheel. It just, you need to be able to give the person the information in a way that becomes rhythmic, and it's like a dance, and it becomes part of just more fluid. And so I would always give very rhythm based, instead of telling them do this when you throw, for example, I would say, hey, go do this drill off to the side where you're just feeling the rhythm of your hips and the stretch of this muscle, and then go throw the javelin. Like, don't think about anything necessarily. I always tried to convey things into a feeling. And so when I do my social media, when I write anything, when I'm trying to output, I always think it's always, I mean, it sounds egocentric, but I'm always like, well, if I was reading this, would I get it? And I try to really, like, I feel like I'm good at making things applicable for me personally and the person I'm coaching. And I think that probably just comes out in the social media, maybe is what I'm trying to say. So it does start with a process on the personal level of, like, this is the product of my own personal workouts, to be honest, in many ways, not just, I guess, sitting there and having algorithms or, thinking about,
Yeah.
it goes from my own workout process and expands.
There's a couple of things that I really love about that. One is and I'll come back to this, but one is that every entrepreneur that I talk to, there's a little bit of a challenge of authority in there, and I connect with that so much as an entrepreneur myself. The other part of that, though, is the way in which you think about the rhythm and how the whole kinetic chain works. I think that's a true sign of what you actually know. I think that proves, from trainer to trainer, that shows me that you get it. From foundational movement all the way up to explosive force. I think that's really cool. So kudos to you on doing that, and I appreciate you and what I've watched so far. It's been really cool.
Thank you.
Jumping into, though, I want to expand on that a little bit. We'll come back to social media and how you built what you built in a second. But was there always an initial charge in you to kind of like buck authority in a sense, or was it like I trust you enough to know that you're coaching me, but I want to go further? Which was there, or a little bit of both?
Well, I guess I'll start with this. I was probably the worst athlete to coach. If you ask my coaches, hey, how'd you like coaching Joel? They'd say terrible, because I wouldn't just listen to what they said. I had to process it through my own body. And there was only one coach ever, track coach at least. Basketball is different because basketball is a team sport, and you can't just be off in La La Land on your own messing with, skill. You can, I mean, a little bit shooting and stuff like that, but basketball is a very integrated system. I played basketball too, and that's actually been another big part of my journey is, okay, I was really good at just learning a skill like throwing a javelin, but that's a whole other animal as soon as you start throwing different people in there. That's off the topic a little bit. They would say that I was terrible because I just want to do things my own way.
Right.
It wasn't so much that. And I had one coach who was actually incredible at coaching me, because he realized that he knew that I wasn't just gonna, he knew he couldn't tell me what to do. He had to instead say, hey, here's a guy who has this idea. This awesome Russian coach I know has this amazing training program. And then I'd be like, oh, really? Tell me more. Like, like he knew how I tick. But I've always been a person that I'm not necessarily, if I tell people this, like I know people who are a 10 out of 10 contrarian. Like if everybody says the X, you say Y or Z, like,
Right.
and I have that instinct in me because I do think that the fitness industry in general, the strength and conditioning industry, like we are super young industries. I mean, we're like, strength conditioning is maybe 50 years old or just over 50. Boyd Epley, Nebraska football, and maybe that was in the late 60s or something like that, early 70s, where he was actually, here's a strength coach for a team. And I mean, fitness has been around for longer, of course, but I think mainstream, well, actually, yeah, no, I should actually take that back, because mainstream fitness has been around a long time, but I don't know that I could tell you that I don't think that the strength and conditioning industry has necessarily grown that much off of what Boyd Epley was doing in the 70s. Like if you looked at that guy's stuff, that was really creative and innovative. And there was a lot of really innovative stuff back then. And now it's like, I just don't know if we ask enough questions sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a strong part of me, there's a definite strong part of me that is an extreme perfectionist. And then which is not always a good thing, but then and that by perfectionist, it means I want to ask the questions to find the right answer. And I'm going to keep asking until I find what's right. And there's another part of me that is like the very like trailblazer, and I'm going to do things a different way, and kind of like, it almost I'm not saying that's always good, but that's a strong drive of mine. And so it's like those two things are always just driving forward. And so there is that. I guess you could call it a rebel, but I don't really think of myself as a rebel. I more just think of myself as someone who wanted to ask the right questions and, was trying to do that in a way that helped everybody.
Always wants more. Yeah, they're or just not satisfied. And I think there are both positive and negative connotations to that. But I found myself that way, so I recognize a little bit of myself in you. Always wanting to know, like it can't be a one size fits all. There's got to be another way. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's cool. So let's move on a little bit to the social media aspect. So you've built your social media. You've got a pretty decent following. Is there a recipe for that? Is it a hashtag thing? Is it a way you interact with people? Is it a way that you interact online? Maybe you can give a couple of quick tips for those out there listening that want to scale their social media, both in quality, but also in the way they interact. So
yeah. So I'm a little different or nuanced. Well, I'll say this too. So by social media, I mean, it's just Instagram mostly. I mean, I used to do Facebook ads back in the day, and then I eventually realized that market was saturated. I didn't really get into that market. But I remember I've talked with Chad Wesley Smith of Juggernaut Training Systems before, and he was really big into Facebook ads when they were hot.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I really was not on top of it back then. And so even with all this stuff, I mean, I haven't really been to the point where I have been chasing like what's the latest social media I need to really be on until really probably this year, which was disappointing because it's like Gary Vee says try TikTok, and I look at it, I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like this
That's
is
the same way.
and so anyways, yeah, like I like you shaking your head. I'm like I don't know. Or like I did, I was looking at Snapchat for like a week, and I was like, what in the world's going on here? I don't get this at all. And so yeah, so the Instagram, I have a decent following. I still have my blue check mark, but 28,000. And I'll say up front, about 5,000 of that was because my buddy Paul Cater hired a service called Jumper Media. One of those people to boost your following. But I mean, and again, like you could get people to boost you 100,000, and then you get engagement. You can get people who you think are going to get relevant people in. And at first it was awesome, like getting Jumper. I think I got them when I had about 4,000 followers, maybe, I don't know, 3 years ago. And it was cool to see. It's like, oh wow, I'm up to 8,000 and 9,000. But it's like, wait, my engagement's going down, and who's these random people from India and Africa following me? And like, well, maybe this isn't a good idea. And so I cut that. And honestly, I don't know. I'm like, I look at a lot of people who are in the similar boat as me, and who haven't done that, and I'm like, I probably should have just left it as it was. I mean, at this point, it'd be 23,000, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
And I probably have a little better engagement. So I kind of like, I guess I learned that lesson. But a lot of people follow me. I don't do any marketing on it. I have no schemes. It's all outside. For the most part, it's I guess a two-headed prong. Most people know me because of my podcast. I started that 3 years ago. That podcast gets about 55,000 downloads a month, which is nice. So that's where people know me. And that's been really powerful. And I mean, I just have my hand in a lot of stuff. So I have books, I have, different, all the social media channels, obviously, but books, podcast, I have a website. So Just Fly Sports has been around for a while, an email list. And I think I would say I probably on average get a lot of followers just because people listen to the podcast. Like, oh, hey, who's this guy? Okay. His Instagram looks decent. I'm going to follow him. So I don't actually do a lot. If I'm to spend my energy dollars right now, then I know it might need to change later. Maybe once my next book comes out and I have a little more capital, I'll get like a manager. I'm not going to do it myself because I just don't, I can't, like my bandwidth is not good enough to be good at that many things. So I will pay someone to do that stuff for me. I don't enjoy it enough to like, I don't wake out of bed like, oh yeah, I want to do some social media, some Instagram tweaking, just me personally. Like that's just me, I'm not excited enough. So I will outsource that.
Yeah.
What I do is anything that's creative on my own end and content wise, I do enjoy doing. So, which I just enjoy going to the gym and turning on music and messing around with exercises until I find something that I don't think anyone else has found in the whole world on how to do something or learn running or jumping or something that caters to lifting. And I'll post that and I'll try to make it relevant. I'll use LumaFusion for my stuff. And I find that's easy enough for me. It doesn't check me out. I used to even write the subtitles for my videos and that. I was like, man, that was a waste of 30 minutes. I felt like, I mean, it probably wasn't, but like you can use subtitle and they'll do one video a month for free. Like, why am I doing this? Like, So a lot of it, and I find the more personal affirmation work I do a lot every morning. I start with a lot of like, meditation, affirmation, law of attraction, journaling stuff. And I find the more of that I do, the better I just become myself, the more almost I have this like meter on what's worth my time or not, if that makes sense. And so, so that the website's the reason people come in, the podcast, and then the actual content. I don't know. I just decided to do a checkerboard thing because I'm ADD or I need something to say, okay, it's a dark post day today. Okay, it's a light post day today, for a variety in my own mind. So then I know I'm not doing the same thing over and over again. It at least keeps me diverse. I always try for diversity. My podcast, I try for diversity. So I do like, it'll be like, hey, here's a how-to on a sprint that I did the other day. Then the next one's like, hey, here's a quote on Twitter. Then it's back to, an exercise or performance or an analysis. And then it's back to a black post. So the black post might be a list. And my web designer, my business partner, Jake Clark, puts all the fancy stuff, anything that looks good on Instagram is him. So if I have like a list idea, it's like, hey, Jake, I want to do 10 ways to run better. I don't know, 10 ways to run better. Here's my list, and he'll make it look nice. And so we just have, and then it fits with the branding and all that stuff. So yeah, that's a little bit about our Instagram story.
Yeah, it makes sense. You've got, I like it when I think a lot of people don't understand that when it's not your forte, it is 100% cool to hire out, partner up, do something like that, and give yourself a little bit of freedom. I mean, it's great to know your strengths, but it's really important to also know your weaknesses, and fill those gaps any way you can. So yeah, it looks good, man. What's the podcast? So tell everybody what the podcast is so that they can all go and download it.
Yeah. So again, it's funny because I started as a writer when I was 22, I started writing and blogging, and just something that's always been a part of me. But about 4 years ago, I don't know, it's like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast. No reason why, no thought about what it could become, money, sponsorships, anything. Just, I don't know. I just need to start doing this. And I think something inside me knew that I just needed to, I was so isolated, like an island, like this island of sprint and jump training, basically, is kind of what I was. And I need to get in the habit of reaching out and talking to other coaches. And this will be a great way for me to do it. And it's more content. Because at some point, and honestly, if you look at the website, Just Fly Sports, I used to have an article every week or so. And I don't know, like it just kind of got old just trying to sit down and come up with something to write versus you talk with the coach for an hour, hour and a half. And there's just like this incredible dynamic. And it's more efficient for the person listening because they're in their car, they're on their way to work, they're out for a walk, and they can, it's versus having to sit down and read. And so anyways, it went from being something that I was just like, oh, this would be nice, to 4 years later, it's by far the biggest pull to what I do. It is bigger than the Instagram. It's bigger than the website. It is, if people say Joel Smith in the sports performance world, they're like, oh, he runs that podcast. And so that is, that's been the biggest growth for me. And I think that honestly, I am a writer, but for some reason, my strengths come really into, I think actually being a podcast host might be a bigger strength of mine for whatever reason. And I think it's just because I love talking, I love being authentic, and I love just like dragging out the thing that will make your skill better. I try to drag out the thing that will make the service to the coach, like, okay, I know here's all this, philosophical talk. Well, let's bring this down to earth. What do you do? It always has to come back to that. It always does. And so I try to seek guests that I know that will be the thing. I've avoided having guests who were popular on other shows where I know there was no bottom line. Like I avoid those shows, and I really try to just have shows that make me a better coach. Like I want a show that can give me some stuff to go do and either have a better training session myself or coach someone better. And if that doesn't exist, I won't say I don't want to talk to you, but it's not going to be the best use of my time or your time. And so
what we call that around here is adding value to people's lives. So I appreciate it. That's what we promote. Like that's your product should be a value to someone else's life and an improvement. So I totally get that.
Yeah, it's always the bottom line is, it's how can we, and I that's where my affirmations have gone, instead of saying like, oh, I want to make X amount of dollars and saying that 1,000 times or whatever. And that does work, I believe, by the way, on some level, is how can I am going to deliver X amount of value to the world, and things come around, and so that's been something that's powerful, I think.
That's really cool, man. And so the podcast is Just Fly Sports, or is it on justflysports.com? Which one is it? Can we get to it from your website?
Yeah, if you go to justflysports.com, there's you can't miss it. It's the main content. It's just right there. If you go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever is big, Stitcher, whatever is big, it's on there. So
we'll link it. We'll link it in the video here too, so that everybody can get to it. Well, for any words you have for coaches out there, maybe give me a couple of tips for the entrepreneurial part of the coach, but also that coach that is out there saying all the things that you hated. Maybe you can give me a couple of tips in that way. I would love to hear them.
Yeah. So the biggest tip, I guess, is, I talk to a lot of coaches. I've had we're up to episode 216 of the podcast. And so I'm actually one of the coaches of the podcast that I'm willing to have younger coaches on the show if I feel like they have great, awesome value. And I've had 23 and 24-year-olds on the show. This is being a podcast that the most seasoned veteran coaches listen to. So it's kind of the idea, well, what does the 23-year-old have to ask, for me? Well, I asked the question, how did I find that 23-year-old? Like, what did that 23-year-old have to give value? That I was like, whoa. And I speak about that meaning from the coach listeners who might not have, a huge audience right now.
Right.
And so, because some of these coaches I brought on don't, like, they might just have a few thousand followers, but I found something in them that stood out. And to me, it's always asking, what can I do where is the biggest need in this field right now? Or where's the biggest need in my community right now? Like how can this be better than it is? And willing to ask that question, like, versus I think a lot of times this is what I feel this in fitness a little bit is I think it does come down a lot of times to what feeling did the client get, and that's exactly what we should get. But
Right.
sometimes I feel like the feeling that you want isn't the feeling that you need, meaning sometimes we just want to grind. We want to get in and grind because we want to grind. We want to get away from our anxieties, the troubles of the day. We just want to go into a hole of hard work, and which is good. But I almost feel like, what if there is like, and maybe I'm hoping I don't turn this the wrong way. I'm just giving an example. And this is like, what if instead of like just an escape, the training session is a celebration of life itself? And by that, I mean infusing elements of like rhythm and dance and, personal development even, and things that go, I know in like San Diego, they're bringing DJs into places.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I'm just saying that's an example, I think. And a guy who I brought on who was 24 years old, recently on the show, Austin Yoakum, is a good example. Yoakum's strength is his Instagram. He may have like 3,000 followers or so, but what drew me to him that I thought was amazing, that fact that, here's a guy who a lot of podcast hosts might overlook because he's young, he doesn't have a lot of followers, XYZ, is the theme was consistent. He was extremely professional. He had me on his podcast, and I thought he did an amazing job. And if it wasn't for those things, like, I wouldn't have known him, who he was. So I would say, like, look, like, if you want to get out there, solve problems, do something different. Don't be afraid to ask, like, if you have a podcast, don't be afraid to ask a big name person to be on your show, because they might reciprocate it. If you know your stuff and you're doing the work on yourself, you never know what would be reciprocated. So those were some things that drew me to Austin. I think that might be a good example for someone who's just trying to break through on their own end and what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's a great example. Yeah. Consistency, be professional, follow through. You never know who's listening.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, especially you never know who's listening. And so it's like you always want to treat everything like that big name person that could bring you up could be. Even for me, I like every client I work with, I don't care who you are, like you could be an Olympian, or you could be maybe just a kid in 8th grade who's like kind of middle of the pack and just hoping to make the JV team in a few years, and I will give you 110% no matter who you are. And I think that for a podcast or anything, it's all the same. So that's always important.
That's cool. Well, Joel, I appreciate you being here. We're gonna hop off of here. Everyone, please go follow Joel. It's Just Fly Sports on Instagram, but you can check out justflysports.com and go download that podcast, buy a book, support your trainers out there. So, Joel, once again, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for stopping by and being a part of this. It's been great.
All right. Thank you for having me, Terry. It was awesome, man.
Absolutely.